Forget the standard jeeps and normal tanks. What if I told you the military once built a 24-wheeled apocalyptic Leviathan or a bizarre hybrid of a motorcycle and a battle tank? These are not concepts from a sci-fi movie. These are 100% real classified engineering anomalies from global military history. Today, we are opening the top-secret dossiers on the 10 most bizarre, massive, and downright shocking vintage military trucks ever constructed. You will not believe the sheer scale and absolute madness of these machines. Make sure you watch until the very end, because the final truck on this list is an overengineered disaster that practically destroyed itself. Hit that subscribe button right now and let's uncover these mechanical monsters. Opening the dossier on our first mechanical anomaly, we find the Lark LX, originally designated as the Bark. At first glance, you might mistake this colossal machine for a floating steel fortress rather than a conventional truck. Developed by the United States military in the early 1950s, this amphibious cargo vehicle was designed with one singular, audacious goal: to haul incredibly heavy equipment directly from ship to shore without ever needing a standard harbor. It looks like a giant bathtub on steroids, a bizarre hybrid of a maritime vessel and a heavy-duty hauler ignoring all standard vehicle proportions. Looking at the exact declassified spec sheets, the sheer scale of the Lark LX is difficult to comprehend. Empty, this beast weighs an astonishing 97.5 tons. That is roughly the equivalent weight of 14 fully grown male elephants combined. To move this steel mountain, engineers slapped in 4 massive 265 horsepower GMC diesel engines, dedicating one engine for each enormous wheel. Speaking of wheels, the tires alone stood an incredible 9 feet tall. A full-grown human being looks like a toddler standing next to just the hubcap of this monstrous American amphibious landing craft. Despite its bizarre, lumbering appearance, the Lark LX was highly effective in the field. It saw significant action during the Vietnam War, reliably ferrying everything from supplies to massive earth-moving equipment across muddy beaches where standard landing craft would have hopelessly beached themselves. It was an engineering triumph of the Cold War era, remaining in limited service until the late 1990s before finally being retired. Yet, while America was building giant amphibious bathtubs, the British were engineering a completely different kind of off-road beast to conquer land, one that looked exactly like a giant mechanical praying mantis. Turning the page to British wartime archives, we encounter the Scammell Pioneer, a machine that looks less like a standard military truck and more like a bizarre, articulating metal insect. First designed in 1927 and extensively utilized throughout the Second World War, the Pioneer was the British Army's ultimate answer to completely impassable terrain. It possessed an oddly tall, narrow cabin and a remarkably high ground clearance that gave it a distinctly awkward top-heavy silhouette. However, this strange appearance masked one of the most capable heavy recovery and artillery tractor platforms ever deployed on the muddy European battlefield. The absolute secret to the Pioneer's legendary status lies hidden in its highly unconventional engineering. Instead of a traditional suspension, it utilized a transverse leaf spring for the front axle and a unique walking beam suspension in the rear. This allowed the rear wheels a jaw-dropping 2 feet of vertical articulation. Powered by a modestly sized 102 horsepower Gardner 6-cylinder diesel engine, it was not built for speed, crawling at a top pace of just 24 miles per hour. But its pulling torque was so immense it could drag a stranded 30-ton tank out of a deep, muddy ditch. Throughout the blazing deserts of North Africa and the muddy fields of Europe, the Scammell Pioneer proved to be practically unstoppable. It became the unsung hero of the British armored divisions, rescuing countless vehicles that standard transport trucks could not even reach. Its rugged, over-engineered design ensured that many survived long after the war, working reliably in heavy civilian logging operations. The Pioneer was certainly a masterclass in weird but effective traction. But if you think a little British truck had crazy wheels, just wait until you see the top-secret 24-wheeled Leviathan the Soviets were hiding behind the Iron Curtain. Deep within the most highly classified Soviet dossiers of the Cold War, we uncover a vehicle so utterly massive and complex that it borders on science fiction, the MAZ-7907. This was not a standard truck meant to haul basic rations or troops. This was a rolling apocalyptic launch pad. Built in the 1980s by the Minsk automobile plant, this gargantuan transporter erector launcher was specifically designed to carry a massive intercontinental ballistic missile. Just looking at the declassified photographs of this Leviathan rolling through the frozen Russian landscape is enough to induce a sense of overwhelming mechanical dread. The hard specifications of the MAZ-7907 are completely absurd. It measures over 92 feet in length, making it roughly as long as a commercial passenger jet fuselage. But the most staggering feature is its mobility system. It boasts 24 individual driving wheels, utilizing a mind-bending 24x24 drivetrain. To power this colossal 66-ton empty chassis, a machine rated to carry a 150-ton payload, Soviet engineers adapted a 1,250 horsepower gas turbine tank engine. They connected it to an intricate electrical transmission system, essentially turning each individual wheel into an independent, powerful electric motor. Ultimately, the MAZ-7907 proved to be too complex and cumbersome even for the massive Soviet military apparatus. Only 2 prototypes were ever fully constructed, and the end of the Cold War quickly sealed the fate of this 24-wheeled monster, leaving it to slowly rust in secretive military yards. It remains one of the most extreme, overengineered wheeled vehicles in human history. But while this specific prototype was a failure, the Soviet Union did succeed in creating another gigantic truck that actually saw widespread use, specifically designed to haul heavy armor across devastated, muddy wastelands. Flipping to the next page of Soviet military might, we find the older, highly successful sibling of the previous monster, the MAZ-537. If you ever need to define the term brutalist engineering with a single photograph, this 8x8 heavy-duty tank transporter is the ultimate example. Introduced in 1959, this vehicle was built to do the incredibly dirty work of hauling massive, heavy Soviet battle tanks across the unforgiving terrains of Eastern Europe and Siberia. With its flat, imposing cab and massive tires, it looks like a mechanical bulldog designed purely for raw pulling aggression. The MAZ-537 is a true masterpiece of blunt force capability. Weighing in at over 21 tons completely empty, it was formally rated to tow a staggering 50-ton load on its customized semi-trailers, though it often hauled even heavier burdens. To achieve this monumental task, it was equipped with a monstrous 38.8-liter V12 diesel engine producing 525 horsepower. The fuel consumption was famously abysmal, drinking diesel at a rate that would bankrupt a modern shipping company. But in the context of Cold War military logistics, fuel efficiency took a backseat to absolute unstoppable power. For decades, the MAZ-537 was the undisputed backbone of Soviet heavy logistics, a fearsome sight rumbling through Red Square military parades and deployed heavily in various global conflicts. It was incredibly rugged, unbelievably loud, and exceptionally effective at moving heavy armor directly to the front lines. It was a crude but brilliant solution to massive heavy transport needs. However, as global warfare modernized, militaries realized they needed vehicles that were not just strong but mechanically versatile and self-loading. This brings us to an American logistics platform that completely revolutionized how modern armies supply their troops. Opening the contemporary United States military logistics files, we encounter a vehicle that has already earned its vintage status through sheer weird ingenuity, the palletized load system, or PLS. Introduced in 1993, this massive 10x10 tactical truck does not look like a classic flatbed or a covered transport. Instead, it features a bizarre giant hydraulic arm dominating its entire rear section. It looks less like a traditional transport truck and more like an industrial robotic insect, specifically designed to carry standardized steel shipping containers across a chaotic, heavily contested, and intensely hostile battlefield. The absolute genius of the PLS lies in its fully autonomous self-loading mechanism. Powered by a massive 500-horsepower Detroit diesel engine, this heavy truck can carry a 16.5-ton payload on its back, plus another identical 16.5-ton payload on an attached trailer. Here is the visual anchor. A single driver, without ever leaving the safety of the armored cabin, can use the giant hydraulic hook to grab a flat rack loaded with heavy ammunition and pull it onto the truck bed in under 1 minute. It is essentially an all-terrain forklift combined with a heavy-duty semi-truck. The PLS fundamentally changed American military logistics forever, allowing for lightning-fast resupply missions during complex global operations like Desert Storm. It definitively proved that sometimes the weirdest-looking trucks are simply the most heavily optimized for a very specific, crucial, and dangerous task. It remains a marvel of modern, heavy-lifting logistical engineering. But let us leave the realm of massive tactical logistics and rewind time back to the dark days of the Second World War, where German engineers decided the absolute best way to move through thick mud was to crossbreed a motorcycle with a miniature tank. Delving into the bizarre World War II German engineering dossiers, we find the SDKFZ-2, universally known as the Kettenkrad. If you have ever watched a classic war movie, you might have done a double take at this completely ridiculous-looking contraption. It features the front wheel, handlebars, and saddle of a standard street motorcycle, grafted directly onto the rear track chassis of a miniature tank. Originally conceived as a specialized light tractor for airborne troops capable of fitting inside a transport plane, it quickly became one of the most wonderfully strange vehicles of the entire global conflict. The internal mechanics of the Kettenkrad are fascinatingly weird. It was powered by a modest 36-horsepower water-cooled Opel car engine, which sat right behind the driver. The track system was surprisingly complex, featuring overlapping road wheels similar to Germany's heavier battle tanks, just heavily miniaturized. Steering this strange hybrid was an adventure in itself. For slight turns, turning the handlebars moved the front wheel like a normal bike. But for sharp turns, the handlebars automatically engaged a complex system of steering brakes on the heavy tracks, allowing the vehicle to pivot sharply in extremely tight, confined spaces. Despite its bizarre, seemingly cartoonish appearance, the Kettenkrad was an incredibly successful and highly sought-after military vehicle. It could climb unbelievably steep mountainous grades, pull small artillery pieces, and lay communication cables through dense forests where larger transport vehicles could not fit. It was a nimble half-track mountain goat of a machine. But as the war rapidly progressed, the Germans quickly realized that miniature half-tracks were not enough. They urgently needed to haul massive amounts of vital supplies through the bottomless mud of the Eastern Front, leading to the creation of a much larger, equally desperate half-track mutation. The military files from the Eastern Front reveal a vehicle born entirely out of pure, muddy desperation, the Opel Maultier. The German name literally translates to mule, which perfectly describes this stubborn, utilitarian beast. When the German army invaded the Soviet Union, they encountered the infamous mud seasons that turned primitive dirt roads into deep, impassable swamps. Standard wheeled supply trucks immediately sank to their axles and became utterly useless. In a frantic bid to keep the freezing front line supplied, engineers took standard Opel Blitz transport trucks and performed a radical Frankenstein-style mechanical surgery on their chassis. The resulting transformation was crude but highly effective for the harsh environment. They chopped off the rear axle and wheels of the standard 3-ton Opel truck and welded on a tracked suspension system, utilizing components heavily derived from obsolete Panzer I light tanks. Under the hood, it retained its reliable 68-horsepower 6-cylinder engine, but its off-road mobility was completely transformed. Imagine taking your standard commercial delivery van, ripping off the back tires and replacing them with the heavy steel treads of a bulldozer. That was the Maultier. It topped out at a painfully slow 24 miles per hour. The slow but steady Opel Maultier successfully saved the German logistics network from total collapse during the brutal Russian winters and muddy springs. Thousands of these half-track mules were hastily cobbled together, moving essential ammunition, food, and freezing troops through conditions that completely defied standard description. It was the ultimate historical example of battlefield improvisation, proving that desperate times call for incredibly weird trucks. Interestingly, Opel was not the only manufacturer forced into creating these tracked mutants. A very familiar American automotive brand operating inside Germany was also ordered to create its own bizarre version of the exact same vehicle. Deep inside the wartime industrial production records, we uncover a fascinating and slightly ironic piece of global military history: the Ford Maultier. Yes, you heard that correctly, the Ford Motor Company. Long before the outbreak of the war, Ford had established manufacturing plants inside Germany. When the German military machine demanded immediate solutions to the bottomless Russian mud, this civilian factory was drafted into the desperate half-track conversion program. The final result was a bizarre fusion of classic American automotive engineering and German armored tracks, creating a vehicle that looks exactly like a surreal transatlantic mechanical fever dream. Visually, the Ford Maultier was very similar to the Opel version, but under the skin it carried a distinct American heartbeat. It was directly powered by a 3.9-liter Ford flathead V8 engine, producing roughly 95 horsepower. This is a legendary engine famous in classic American hot rods, radically repurposed to haul heavy military supplies through frozen European swamps. Just like the Opel, the rear wheels were replaced with a specialized track suspension system. Seeing the iconic rounded Ford V8 front grille attached to heavy tank treads rolling through the snows of Stalingrad is an incredibly surreal historical visual. Exactly like its Opel counterpart, the Ford Maultier was a highly vital asset on the Eastern Front, pulling incredibly heavy loads through the absolute worst weather conditions imaginable. It perfectly highlights the strange, complex realities of globalized automotive manufacturing violently colliding with global warfare. While these tracked mules were absolutely necessary for extreme mud, they were painfully slow and consumed massive amounts of scarce fuel. Long before the mud became a devastating crisis, the German military actually preferred advanced wheeled vehicles with radical designs for their elite troops, which brings us to an incredibly unique truck with a famously sloped nose. Opening the pre-war German engineering dossiers, we find the Krupp Protze, a vehicle that looks less like a rugged military truck and more like a strange, aggressive insect. First produced in 1933, this six-wheeled light truck was primarily utilized as an artillery tractor and a rapid troop transport. Its most bizarre and defining visual feature is its sharply sloped, completely flat-nosed engine hood. This highly unusual aerodynamic shape gave the driver absolutely incredible forward visibility over rough terrain, but it also made the truck look incredibly strange, earning it the accurate German nickname Snout Krupp among the troops. The mechanical secret behind that weird sloped snout lies directly in its unconventional power plant. Instead of a traditional inline engine, Krupp engineers fitted a 60-horsepower, air-cooled, horizontally opposed four-cylinder boxer engine. This is very similar in engineering concept to the engines later used in the classic Volkswagen Beetle or a modern sports car. Because the boxer engine sits so low and flat, the front hood could be angled aggressively downward. Furthermore, this 6x4 truck featured an incredibly advanced independent suspension system utilizing coil springs, allowing each rear wheel to articulate separately and smoothly over extremely rough battlefield terrain. The Krupp Protze was a highly advanced, beautifully engineered machine that saw extensive, successful action in the early rapid campaigns of the war, particularly during the fast-paced invasions in Poland and France. However, its complex engineering and relatively light payload capacity meant it was eventually phased out in favor of simpler, much heavier truck designs. It remains a prime historical example of German engineering overcomplication. And speaking of extreme over-engineering, our final classified file reveals the ultimate attempt to create the absolute perfect standardized military truck, a machine so intensely complex it practically engineered its own inevitable downfall. Our final declassified dossier reveals a machine that represents the absolute, undeniable peak of German over-engineering, the Einheits diesel, or standard diesel. Conceived and introduced in 1937, the military high command demanded a standardized, universal six-wheel drive truck that could be efficiently built by multiple civilian manufacturers using completely identical parts. The ultimate goal was supreme battlefield reliability and completely unmatched off-road capability. The final result was an incredibly robust, fascinatingly weird truck that was built like a fine Swiss watch. However, it was entirely too complicated for the brutally chaotic, muddy realities of a massive, global, industrialized war. Mechanically speaking, the Einheits diesel was an absolute marvel of its era. It featured a full, permanent 6x6 wheel drive system, and every single one of its 6 wheels boasted a fully independent suspension setup. It was powered by an ultra-reliable 80-horsepower diesel engine that was practically indestructible under normal conditions. Imagine a heavy-duty transport truck that handled off-road bumps with the sophisticated, smooth articulation of a modern luxury off-road racing vehicle. It could effortlessly climb incredibly steep grades and practically ignore deep ditches. However, this mechanical perfection came at a very steep, ultimately fatal logistical cost. The complex chassis alone was incredibly heavy, meaning that despite its massive overall size, it could only safely carry an utterly disappointing payload of roughly 2.5 tons. On the battlefield, the troops absolutely loved the Einheits diesel for its supreme riding comfort and reliability. It simply never broke down. But military logistics planners absolutely hated it. It was incredibly expensive to manufacture, took way too long to carefully build, and carried far too little cargo for its massive weight. The Einheits diesel stands as a fascinating historical paradox, a vintage military truck simply too perfectly engineered for its own good. From the massive amphibious bulk of the Lark LX to the completely bizarre tank-treaded motorcycles and 24-wheeled Soviet Leviathans, these vintage military trucks prove that wartime engineering knows absolutely no bounds. Which of these crazy, logic-defying historical machines is your absolute favorite? Let us know down in the comments section. If you loved unearthing these bizarre mechanical beasts, make sure to hit that subscribe button like this video, and stay tuned for more incredible deep dives into military history.